I declare the Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 23rd of August 2022, held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco, open at 5:32pm. Welcome everyone. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. Please note this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Okay, in person tonight we've got 4 councillors plus myself, and attending by Zoom we've got Councillor Jennings, and that's it at the moment, which means Councillor Burns is currently absent, and we've got an apology from Councillor Stroud and Councillor De Vries. Councillor Powell, I think, was still meant to be on a leave of absence, but welcome back.
Oh, thank you very much.
I did see your car outside your house, so figured we might see you tonight. Look, I think everyone knows the staff attending this evening, so we won't name them. There's no special staff member joining us. Unusual staff members. It's not getting any better, is it?
It's getting worse.
Let's move on. Disclosure of interest. Are there any disclosures? Okay, there's no approved deputations, and I'm not going to make any announcements. A short briefing is a good briefing. Let's get into the officer reports. C1, tender A/6722, servicing and repair of heavy and light vehicles and major plant 2022. Any questions? C2, the policy review on the purchasing policy. Any questions? Councillor White.
Thank you very much. I submitted some questions in advance, so there were actually 5 questions. Apologies for so many. Should I read them all at once or one at a time? Is it best? What serves the purpose best?
I did see the questions. How long are they? Oh, look, why don't you do them one at a time?
What was the value of the city's procurement in the last 2 financial years? Given that we had these bands in the old, there's a new band of procurement in the revised policy, but given, of course, that we're working on the old policy at the moment, I wonder if it's possible to get them in the 4 categories of the old policy.
Thank you. If I can, through the chair. Yes, absolutely. We've just about got them calculated, but as I put back in the email to yourselves and all the elected members, it will be based on what comes out of the procurement. So there are a couple of other ways in which we procure services, so credit cards and petty cash and those sorts of things. So I'll exclude those, but we're just reconciling it and we'll be able to provide that information to you.
I mean, maybe if I can on that, just to say, you know, I'm cautious about the time taken by staff to troll through and dig all that information out. I guess, you know, part of my interest is to know whether that kind of information gets easier to obtain as we move forward with the new policy as it's referenced. So if I may squeeze that in moving forward. But maybe I'll just go on to the next one in case you've got, and then you can comment on that. Second question, how many suppliers of goods and services to the city in the last 2 financial years are registered within the bounds of the city?
Yeah, if I could, through the chair. Likewise, we'll have that information for you. Should we have it probably by tomorrow morning? But in terms of, it will not be as precise because we don't necessarily categorise suppliers by within the bounds, but we do have them by suburb, and there are obviously 3 suburbs within the city of Subiaco that also expand to other boundaries, but we'll be able to give you a pretty good estimation of that as well, so that will be provided. And in terms of your other question, once the if the council policy changes, how will we go about being able to produce that information more consistently? Yes, well, obviously we have a report now that we're creating that we would be able to produce those in the different bands, and also we could produce that report again for the spend by the types of businesses that are within those suburbs, noting the caveat I've given on they might slightly be outside but within those suburbs.
Thank you. Number 3, the new policy talks about value for money fairly frequently. It's a sort of a core concept within it, and yet it's not really defined very well in the proposed policy. Can you provide any further definition of this term and how it will be used? What's included and what's excluded in the term value for money? And how do you think value for money will be achieved through the implementation of the new policy? Sorry.
Thank you. And look, thanks very much for the questions in advance as well. I do appreciate that very much. So look, the value for money is, I suppose, how you would ordinarily understand it in English. So you could put a definition in, but essentially it's sort of that, what is the most advantageous when you combine a number of elements together, which is cost, quality and sustainability. So it's around that aspect. And it would also incorporate whole of life costing. So sometimes something could be considered lower price, but it doesn't meet the whole of life requirements. Some things are like drains are perhaps 50 to 80 years, whereas others would have a different assessment because it may last 3 years or 2 years or 1 year. So it also considers quality in that, and how does the specification enable this to be fit for purpose. So it's sort of considering all those aspects, and it will come down to the scope by which the procurement process has defined what is sought from the suppliers, and will be assessment of those.
Again, maybe I'll make a brief comment that you might want to comment as the next answer comes through, is that having looked at a number of procurement policies of other local governments in the metro area and spoken to Walga, they seem to have much more precision in that definition in their policies, and I'm kind of wondering why we're lacking that. So in a sense, I feel like, not disagreeing of course with the answer, but I just think, I wonder why we can't be clearer about that in our policy. But again, maybe that's something for next week, but thanks for the response now. Question 4, which is a little bit longer, but the concept is simple. I guess the statement includes a reference to the general purpose of integrating environmental protection, social advancement and economic prosperity. The objective of the new policy is about best value for money that demonstrates consideration of sustainability in procurement in respect of social, environmental and economic factors. It defines social advancement as the understanding of the social economic issues in the community and the need to create training and employment for unemployed or disadvantaged residents and ratepayers within the municipality and its broader region. The definition of economy says support local business and economic diversity. So despite those sort of very general statements, I feel like it's unclear about how those are going to be achieved by the policy. The policy mentions them, but doesn't give any kind of direction to the city in how any of those aspects that I've highlighted would be achieved. And I wonder if you could explain that.
Yeah, if I could through the chair. So those words about integration of environmental protection, social advancement and economic prosperity, that was added to the Local Government Act in about 2004, which followed the state government coming out with their sustainability definition, which essentially was balancing those three particular elements. And once again, it all comes back to what is the scope of what we're trying to procure. And so, for example, there may well be a higher emphasis on, say, to produce an environmental outcome and there may be greater weighting to achieve environmental outcomes. However, the social and the economic would still be considered, because there's possibility of achieving still social and economic outcomes for environmental projects as well. So just it would depend upon how you've described the scope of works and what is actually important in that procurement. So I think that's probably as best an answer I can give, because each procurement of goods and services would have a greater emphasis in different aspects depending upon what it was actually trying to achieve across those three dimensions.
Last question, but if I may, just and without creating a debate about it, I suppose for me the trouble I'm finding is the policy overall is very general, and I think what you're saying there is the scoping of those things, depending on each contract, will vary, which is great, and I understand that. My concern is, and again comparing it with what other local governments have done across the metro area, is that there's much more guidance given in those areas. So yeah, something that's being done for roadworks could look very different to something that's being done for environmental services. But they still need the similar guidance in terms of how economic outcomes will be achieved, how social sustainability issues will be achieved. And right now I'm finding that lacking. But again, I don't want to create the debate now. I know this is not the time for it, but they are concerns. And again, you might want to comment on that to the end. My last question. Several other local governments in the Perth metro area have procurement policies using the WALGA template that include provisions for local economic benefits and environmental sustainability. Again, it seems to be very silent on these matters, and I wonder why.
Yeah, so in the actual policy statement right at the front, what we've done is incorporate actually section 1.3.3, which actually states that in carrying out its functions, the local government is to use its best endeavours to meet the current and future generations through an integration of environmental protection, social advancement and economic prosperity. So we're really trying to bring that right up front in the policy statement. And yes, WALGA do have, and we based sort of drafting this new policy on some of the information contained within the WALGA policies. But as I've said, it's about trying to sort of find the right balance in that regard. You have sort of asked a lot of questions in the past about the local and what local means and the implications, and I suppose I've given some thoughts on that, but ultimately that would be a decision for council, noting that there is also a policy about preference for local suppliers within our policy manual at 3.9. And as we have discussed, if council were to consider making some adjustments in relation to that local preference, then perhaps that one could be shifted into the procurement policy. So that would be my response.
Okay, no other questions for C3? Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, Mayor, and through the Chair. CEO, are you aware of any complaints from local suppliers in relation to procurement? Sorry.
So not in the time that, so just over a year that I've been here, that hasn't been brought to my attention, other than feedback from staff that our suppliers find the current scales that we've got, where we need to get 3 quotes for pretty much everything. Our suppliers have said that is overburdensome in terms of them responding, and so that's sort of been the challenge, which is around those procurement thresholds and the requirement for 1 quote or 3 quotes. So it's more been around, I suppose, the feedback in that regard, but I haven't personally received that feedback myself, but that's just the anecdotal that I've had back from staff in relation to, if something's a list price, how can I give you another quote when that's like the list priced? And that's essentially how we've constructed those sort of categories of procurement and why they're at that particular level.
Thank you.
If there's no more questions about C3, we'll move on. Councillor Burns, welcome. I saw you log in at about 5:35, so presumably governance saw that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor McMullen. I'm sorry about that. I actually logged in earlier, but Zoom decided that they wanted to update me. So I had to wait till that they were installing some updates. So that's I wasn't actually late. I just was held back. So I apologise for that. And thanks for welcoming me.
Councillors, the last item on tonight's agenda is C4. Has that report been circulated? It's the change of business systems strategy. Okay, I've got at least one nod. Were there any questions on C4?
Yeah.
Councillor Jennings.
Thanks, Mayor. Sorry, I just couldn't get my cursor to the thing. One thing I did want to know is what would be the backup if we go to a system that involves storage on the cloud, and then if that's not functioning, what's the backup for that, and how do we operate if that happened where we didn't have access to the cloud for some reason?
CEO.
Yeah, thanks. And Paul may also wish to respond to this as well. And also, just if there are anybody at home watching, there will be in a report that council have been briefed on that will form part of the ordinary council meeting, and it's recommending a strategy change. And council briefed the last couple of weeks in relation to that, and that report is just being finalised. But I suppose my question in relation to just so people understand, there's a recommendation to change a business system strategy to an ERP or integrated system, one system, as it might be called, and that would include most likely that the solution for all our business, or the majority of our business systems, would be in the cloud. So a question from Councillor Jennings is what happens? So the first thing is that solution, many of the cloud providers, and you would need to do your due diligence in relation to that, but many of them operate with at least active, and sometimes active solutions. So there's a 3 replication of data, and they have their whole business model around the world, and there's many of them. One of the leading ones is Amazon Web Services, but there's others, and their whole business is protecting data and making sure that systems are up and running. So what would happen? There would be disaster recovery plans on their behalf, and part of that is to make sure that the data is accessible 24/7. And so essentially what you're doing is, in some ways, you're outsourcing the risk. At the moment, all of those responsibilities of recovery, if we were to, our systems would come down, would be on us. Whereas if it is a cloud-hosted solution, then what you're actually doing is you're relying on that provider whose whole business model for just about every systems, and this goes right through from Defence Force agencies right through, would be the responsibility would be for them to maintain that. Firstly, it's up 24/7, but if some catastrophic event occurred, that they would be able to recover your data and you'd be able to access it that way. Is there anything else you think I need to add, Paul? Yeah.
Yes, through you, Chair. At the moment, we're really reliant on our internet connection to the city to be able to present our current software packages out to every employee, whether they're in the office or out of the office. Having an online solution and moving to an online solution, such as an ERP in the cloud, basically means that we actually improve the ability and reduce the risk of our employees being able to access that system, because they can access it from home using their own internet connections, rather than just being reliant on the city to be able to provide that system to them.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I don't need much information on this, but through you, probably to the CEO, could if there was a security breach, and allowing the fact that there was a security breach, where would be the main source of our concern as to okay, so they grabbed. I only can explain this by example. So they grabbed every ratepayer's information, about properties, etc., etc. Well, that's not the end of the world. So my question moreover is, what would the CEO identify as probably things that would be our highest security interests? Is it how much money we've got in the bank, or our access to our bank accounts, or I'll leave. I think you know where I'm going, so I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, if I could, through the chair, certainly in terms of any security breach, whether it happens with us or if it, I suppose, as I've described, is sort of outsourced to a provider in the cloud who has responsibility, there is national reporting requirements on any of those types of breaches. Most of the security issues, and I mean, we're going sort of into really strange territory soon with many insurance providers not actually providing as much security insurance, that potentially that could cause problems in the future, but at the moment we certainly do have insurance in relation to that. In terms of what is our most valuable data, I suppose there's a couple of different answers to that question, and one is any downtime and the impact on business and what that does to being able to provide a good customer service to our ratepayers, residents, customers. So that how long, should there be a breach and how long that takes to rectify is the important thing. In terms of privacy, there's certainly national privacy requirements, and things like debts, etc., are not public information, and so but much of people's property addresses, so the rate book, for example, the actual property and who owns it and all that sort of information actually isn't private. So I don't think we'd be a high target. I probably shouldn't say that without touching wood, but I'm not sure that our data is of significance in terms of what it could be used for or how it could cause us grief. The issue is more generally around the world around how they can try and extort funds to be able to allow you to continue. But most of the online or cloud-based services are, that's their whole business model of protecting your data. And so actually they're in a much stronger position to be able to ensure that those sort of data breaches or that sort of ransomware doesn't occur. But I'd say the greatest issue would be some of that private information that should not be public.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff. If we're changing, if the council is looking at changing from the current system to a new system, presumably there's going to be a changeover period. How long will that changeover period be, and what problems have been foreseen perhaps in during that changeover?
So what's before council, just for clarity, is for maybe those few people that might be watching, is a consideration of whether or not we change strategies in relation to our business systems, and then it would be go away and put together what is like the business case, which is a project management plan, change management plan, recommended procurement process, and 10-year financial plan relating to that change. And when that information comes back, that will contain in the project management plan a lot of information relating to changeover. And changeover has a range of processes involved and risks are managed. And essentially the way you go through that process, which I've done on many occasions, is you manage your risks and make sure the system would work, and you don't go live until it will. And so there's a simple process for doing that. And for most of the customers, generally what happens is you go live over a weekend. So actually for the majority of customers, they would not know that you've changed from one system to another. And that's generally how you plan for it and manage it. And if the system wasn't ready to go, then you wouldn't go live.
Is there going to be a period of time though when you're actually going to be changing from one system? So you do some part of this one, and then you do. Is there going to be a period of time over which you're actually making the change, and how long? Like, are we looking at a 1 year period of crossover, or how long?
Through the chair. So that that will be detailed in quite detail in relation to the project management plan, and that is articulated in a range of different ways depending upon the availability of particular elements and the recommended implementation approach from the supplier. But I suppose what I'm trying to get across is that it's a bit like you can't eat the whole elephant in one sitting. So generally you compartmentalise the implementation to various modules, and then in that process there would still be some on the old and some on the new, but you manage that through integration, and that would already ordinarily be planned for. So just by way of example, Seamless at South Perth and Canning, and they still had their receipting process was being done in one system, but the rest of the information was contained in another, and it was able to be managed. So there are a lot of examples of local governments, not as many in WA, that have been through similar sorts of processes, and probably the rest in WA are considering whether to proceed now or not.
Just one final follow-up on that, because I suppose that's almost the nub of what I'm trying to get to, is will the city be actually paying to have two systems operating at the same time? Will we be paying for the old system while it's still functioning, and paying for the new system until it comes into operation?
So, as I said, that'll form part of the project management plan, and sometimes that occurs, or sometimes it's portions of systems. So you have a negotiation with the software supplier where potentially you may only be using, say, 25% of their system, and so well prior to that contract ending, you might arrange for a lower or reduced amount to be negotiated to continue to use that particular element of that system if it all hasn't been incorporated within the new system or the module in terms of how the implementation is running. So it really is something that is well planned for, and sometimes you do end up paying for two bits of software, but that forms part of the budget that you put together for the entire plan. And as I said, sometimes it's phased in, phased out, hence the emphasis on trying to do it as sort of fast as you can without breaking everything. So that's sort of the approach. But that would form part of the information that would come through to council probably towards the start of next year. So probably that January, February of next year would have all that information for you in relation to the detail on that.
Okay, it looks like there's no questions at home and no more questions in the chamber. Okay, well, next week we will have a confidential item, and it's going to be in relation to the CEO's performance review, but being a confidential item, that'll go behind closed doors on the basis that it's a matter affecting an employee. So we won't cover that as part of tonight's briefing, but we will have a chance to workshop it confidentially after this briefing with the assistance of the external consultant who's been helping us. So what we'll do now is we'll close the briefing and we'll reconvene to discuss the CEO's performance review. Okay, I declare the City of Subiaco Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 23rd of August 2022 closed at 6:01 p.m. Thanks, everyone.